Bourbonblog.com. Good evening, and it's Colin Spoelman here, joining us from Kings County Distillery. We're talking about several new things. You always have a lot of great things, Colin, but we're going to start with the coffee whiskey, which you recently released. How's everything been at Kings County there, my friend?
Very good, very good. And obviously, American whiskey is in a very exciting place. Craft whiskey is in a very exciting place. I think a lot of people have spent the lockdowns discovering American whiskey, and here we are now enjoying all these new this new audience that is around. Also, bars and restaurants are back, and so one of the exciting things with this particular release in New York, obviously the espresso martini has taken the country by fire. And, within the espresso martini, there's a lot of opportunity to play. And there really aren't a lot of coffee-oriented spirits. I mean, obviously, there's Kahlua, there's Mr. Black, which is an alternative. But those are both liqueurs.
Right.
And so we said, let's try and figure out how to do a coffee whiskey. And so this is unaged whiskey. It's some aged whiskey. And it is then proofed down to 80% with cold brew.
You're using cold brew to proof it down.
Yeah. So with most whiskeys, you'll proof it down with, your mineral water, your finest filtered water. But in this case, we just use cold brew from Parlor Coffee. So Parlor Coffee has always been a friend of ours. They're a neighbor to us in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And they're one of the sort of, I think they have the same attention to detail that we do. They're interested in the source of the source and process of coffee making in the ways that we're interested in the ingredients and processes of distilling. And so, and not to say that we didn't try a bunch of different coffees, but maybe not a huge surprise that we landed on our closest neighbors and our
your local coffee, right?
Ideologically oriented friends at Parlor Coffee.
Cool.
And so that's what it is. So it's their cold brew, and I'm not going to be able to replicate the source of the beans, but you can go to our website at kingscountydistillery.com, and we have a little bit more information about this coffee whiskey.
Sure.
It's got a little bit of sugar in it, so it's not. It has this beautiful sort of graham coffee whiskey.
Oh yeah.
A little hint of sweetness, but not overly so. Not as much as a liqueur.
Yes.
And drinks almost like a straight whiskey. And so, I mean, so that's its sort of positioning. Can work an espresso martini, can work as an after dinner sort of sipper, with your cigar or whatever. And we were comparing it internally to Madeira, that sort of like after dinner, very rich fortified wine. It has that sort of potency of flavor because there's really not a lot of water in it. It's really just coffee and whiskey, in ways that are hard to pull off if you're just mixing, spirits or in a cocktail. This is really even going into the spirit itself. There's not a lot of water at it.
I see the Madeira, the more old world wines. You get some of that viscosity. You have so I have this is your original bourbon that I've poured right here. Take a look at that color difference.
Yeah.
It's just so serious. You can tell that you basically had some aged and unaged whiskeys of varying ages. Proofing it down. What's the proof it starts out at? 120, 130-ish?
Even higher than that, 130. If you aggregate the aged whiskeys and the unaged whiskeys, the unaged whiskeys are about 140. The aged whiskeys are going to be around 120. So you got let's say 125, 130, and then you proof it down with a cold brew, a little bit of sugar, and it's very, it's not overwhelmingly coffee. Even like you might have a sip of it and say, oh, there's a chocolatiness to it.
There is kind of nice cocoa creaminess. You said it. Did you say a little graham cracker note? Is that what I heard you
Yeah,
say?
yeah.
A graham cracker. The grain comes through nicely in it, but so does this beautiful, nice sweetness. It's not like syrupy sweet. It's a beautiful sweetness. How does that look? Okay, so I know if we had a glass of whiskey and we poured coffee into it, we were having like an Irish coffee or a Brooklyn coffee. I know what that would look like. When you're doing it in a big batch, or I know it's not a huge batch, how does that work? Paint that picture for us. How does that look?
Well, that's the thing. An Irish coffee is a wonderful. It's like a mint julep. It's only 3 ingredients, but you have to kind of get everything sort of precisely correct for it to all work, because otherwise it can fall apart pretty fast. And so I give full credit to Nathan, who's on our staff, Nathan Reinke, who really developed this whiskey, and comes from bartending. I mean, has worked for really noted bartenders in the city, and I think learned that craft, and then but also has been sort of simultaneously in our blending department and really working towards elevating all of our whiskeys. But there was this opportunity to take to kind of sew it all up in the same in a kind of new product. We haven't done a lot of whiskeys that were explicitly aimed at a cocktail audience. And so I think this one really kind of, in a way, is the first one that we've done that's more aimed at mixology than we normally do at Kings County.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so good. And I can see so many directions you could put this. Just neat. I'm having it neat. Put it on the rocks. You could do it little cream, kind of a take on a Kahlua and cream, whatever it might be. You could put this beside a coffee. You could put this beside a cheesecake. The options are endless. Or espresso martinis. It is interesting. The last 3, 4, 5 years, espresso martinis coming back. Did you ever think you'd see espresso martinis back like they are?
No, I did not. But you see some of that in the sort of, not necessarily in our side of the alcohol business, but obviously there's sort of the Red Bull and vodka and the Four Loko. If you're old enough to remember that moment when the U.S. Congress banned Four Loko for being too much all around. So, there's always been a little bit of a like caffeine and alcohol sort of realm, but again, not much, nobody really trying to do a more sophisticated version of it. And even within the sort of spirits that you might pull for that kind of thing, nothing quite like this. I should give some credit to Few. I think Few Spirits in Chicago does, or in Evanston, they do a coffee whiskey that's, I think, a little bit similar in process. But generally not, this is not something that you can go to most local liquor stores and pick up a coffee whiskey.
Right. You just don't see it. There are obviously there's a lot of flavored whiskeys out there, and to each their own with those. But when you think about a distillery that's known for what you're known for, you've done this so well in very small batches. You're taking a large amount of whiskey, and you probably have a large amount of coffee that you're blending it. Are you letting it sit for a while before it's bottled? How does that?
It'll steep for a little bit, but really this is, in a way, one of the first. We do some infused whiskeys like the grapefruit jalapeno and a spiced whiskey. We do a chocolate whiskey. Because of the process of this, it doesn't really need to steep in the way that an infusion would need to steep.
Right.
So it's pretty much, it's a sort of, we blend it to a recipe and we can scale it pretty quickly. Which is another thing that's been important for us as a small distillery is, can we come up with a product that doesn't take time to produce in the way that our aged whiskeys do, or even some of our infused whiskeys do?
Unless there's if there's something proprietary, we certainly don't want to reveal your secrets, but I'm trying to imagine a big, container of coffee coming over from your neighbors.
Right.
How does that look? I mean, what is that?
Yeah, it comes in a drum, and I think we're getting like 25-gallon drums, not even
25-gallon drums.
Yeah, and so we can blend it up in a tank. Usually, it's not a huge batch size either. I mean, we hope that this takes off and we start to do, 250 case batches. But right now, we're doing 60 case batches, which is a pretty reasonable size. It's not a huge tank. It takes up, yeah, but I don't know. your desk at work, it's
Yeah,
that size.
yeah. It's and that's incredible. So just to think that a lot of brands of whether it's spirits that have partnered with a local coffee roaster, whatever it might be, maybe they've gone across town. It's literally going across Brooklyn Navy Yard. It's going right into your whiskey. It's happening all right there, which I think is just keeping it truly local and is fascinating.
Right, and it's a collaboration, which as a small business, we've started to recognize that our own voice is somewhat limited. So things like Empire Rye, where we work with other distillers,
Yes.
Or the Marianne Eaves project, where we worked with a blender outside of our universe. This is really in the same way. There's a lot of businesses that serve parlor coffee at their restaurant. Why not also serve the coffee whiskey at their bar? It's just it's a little bit of a play that way that hopefully people will appreciate. If they're serving parlor coffee, they've already made a choice to spend a little more money, go for the more transparency and integrity. But then here's a whiskey that meets those same criteria and has the same philosophy and values.
So again, it's the new coffee whiskey, Kings County Distillery, and you can go onto their website. It's you ship to some states, right? Or they can even find it in there.
Yeah, this one will ship to pretty much any state that will allow us to ship to it. So that excludes maybe 6 to 8 states. But you can order it right now. I believe $45 on our website.
Beautiful stuff.
Just a cool whiskey to have in your collection. I mean, not, again, as you say, flavored whiskeys. There's a lot of them, but this
it goes beyond flavor. This is a certain
coffee is it's an adult taste, and so I think it's not birthday cake whiskey. It's it's coffee whiskey.
That's right. Though we will raise a toast. Colin just recently had a birthday, and cheers to you, man. Hope you had a
yes, thank you.
Good birthday, and the number of years we're celebrating for Kings County this year for your distilleries. How many?
13 for Kings County.
13 for Kings County. Some of the oldest whiskey now is how old?
12. We have a 12-year barrel.
12-year barrel.
Then, in terms of practical whiskey aging, we have a couple 9-year-old barrels, 8-year barrels. And so really 7 years is when we start to have whiskey in volume. And that's kind of the leading edge of the practical whiskey that we have available.
So you have some you're holding on to let age that are like 9, that are like 12. But some of the 7-year-old, I understand there's going to be a release of the Bottled-in-Bond 7-year coming up.
Yeah, so we can the news is coming out tomorrow, but I can give you an exclusive here.
Thank you.
At Bourbon Blog. So we do have the 7-year Bottled-in-Bond whiskey. Every year we come out with a Bottled-in-Bond, and every year it sort of has come to it has evolved in our portfolio to be kind of the age-stated whiskey that we release.
Right. And
so last year we did a 6-year. This year, we're taking barrels from the same distilling season, but that are now 7 years. So it's only about 100 cases. And so we'll send a little bit out to all of the markets that we cover. So everybody will have a chance to get a bottle, but it'll be highly allocated. And we're releasing that at the distillery on Wednesday, July 15th. I'm sorry, July 12th.
Very
that right. Wednesday, July 12th. And it's a 7-year Bottled-in-Bond. And it'll retail for $125, which I mean, that may sound like a lot of money. But for what this whiskey is, I think it is. I mean, last year, our Bottled-in-Bond, the 6-year, won a double gold from the San Francisco World Spirits Competition.
Well done.
So you have to imagine this is 1 year more mature than that one. And I think it is among the finest of the whiskeys that Kings County makes. And we have always designed our whiskeys to be very, uncompromising.
Right.
So that's very exciting. And then that very same night at the distillery, Wednesday, July 12th, we had one barrel of 7-year. It was filled in November 2015, and nearly the entirety of the barrel is a 53-gallon barrel. Nearly the entirety of the barrel had leaked away. All but 5 bottles was all that was left in the barrel.
750s.
5 750s.
Yeah. And
the proof had climbed to 158.6. So I don't know what that is.
It has
alcohol. I'll do the quick math on that, but
that's big. That's really a big. Were you surprised?
Almost 80% alcohol.
That's huge.
So we get a lot of inquiries. We've done some high proof barrels.
Yeah.
And so there is a sub audience within Barrel Strength fans for Hazmat barrels. Yeah. We get inquiries all the time for Hazmat barrels. Not every Hazmat barrel is even all that drinkable. It takes a sort of unique Hazmat barrel to qualify as a single barrel. But the blending team of Ryan and Nathan flagged this barrel, said this one is really kind of interesting and exceptional. And there's only 5 bottles of it. So that night, when we're releasing the 7-year Bottled-in-Bond, we're going to offer pours of the Hazmat. So if you're so inclined for the very adventurous, you can come in and taste the 158 proof or 80% alcohol whiskey. And we'll give you a little certificate of completion. And $50 pours. But it's an experience, you know.
Is there a name for that certification you have?
I don't know. It's just going to be, I survived the Hazmat.
I survived. I'm trying to imagine. This happens to be a really good barrel. A whole lot goes missing. Do you think there were some thirsty angels of Brooklyn that got into this?
It happens to us all the time, and I mean, for whatever reason, we do see really high proof, and we go and enter the barrel at 116. So this is not your Kentucky entry proof of 125. This is a slightly lower entry proof, and then it climbs all the way up to 80% alcohol over the course of its aging process. Now, most distillers would fold this into something else, right? But we kind of like including people in the process and the behind the scenes.
Sure.
And so something like this, it's really wild. I mean, something so concentrated, so intense. I mean, you can't really drink it as is. You have to add water, but just to have that one tiny little sip at full strength is enough to kind of give you.
Yeah. What did you think? I mean, when you're trying something that high for this one, what did you think when you tried it? Were you?
It's again, it's like you get one little sip and then it kind of numbs your taste buds, and so then you kind of dilute it down. But there's a process of diluting it down, right? Yeah. You can go. So add a little water, try it again. Add a little water, try it again, and that ends up being sort of the fun of it. But
so that'll be the night you're releasing the 7-year-old Bottled-in-Bond. Again, you're probably, from what you're saying, one of the best releases you think you've had for a while, as far as the older whiskeys.
Yeah, I mean, we do different whiskeys that appeal to different personalities. Sure. I mean, when I say best whiskey, we have a best whiskey if you're a barrel proof person. We have a best whiskey if you're an age stated person. We have a best whiskey if you're a rye person. We try to make really exceptional whiskeys for a lot of different palates. But for those who are inclined to like fine old Kentucky bourbon, our Bottled-in-Bond is the closest that we make to that sort of flavor profile.
So the news coming soon. You heard it here on bourbonblog.com first. And again, another special announcement that very serious Hazmat 158 proof will be available for I guess how many pours will there be available if you're doing?
There's only 80 pours.
80 pours. So you better be lining up the gatehouses.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we'll issue people, sort of your place in line so that when you do show up, will be those who come early will be guaranteed. And
I love it. That's so cool. So much to look forward to it coming up. Obviously, you've had your blended whiskey out for a while in the Blue Label. We love that. We've poured that at a few events in New Jersey and New York not too long ago. People are loving that. That's getting some good response as well.
Yeah, that's getting some good response, and we've even found a way to even reduce the price a little bit on that. So in most markets, it'll be available for less than $50, which is
beautiful.
A new one for us. I mean, we have the constraints of being in New York City, but at the same time, We're a distiller, and we have a lot of advantages when you control the entirety of the process. So we found some efficiencies in that with that whiskey, and so that's another way that we can kind of reach a little bit of a broader audience. But again, we try to make a little bit of whiskey for everybody, and whether you're sort of just want that kind of entry level, price sensitive American whiskey that's very different from Kentucky bourbon. We have the blended bourbon, which is a little lighter in profile, but certainly but still pot distilled, made according to all the ways that Kings County is differentiated with their open fermentation, pot distillation, multiple barrel formats, multiple whiskeys in there. You have bourbon, you have rye whiskey, single malt whiskey in there, all blended together at 2 or more years.
I get the question often, tell me some of your favorite bourbons, favorite regions other than Kentucky, of course. New York is right up there as a state. Of course, we love what you do at Kings County. I think that New York bourbons and ryes, of course, the Empire ryes, have become more and more recognized and more popular across the country, even internationally. What's that feel like for you? And what has it been like as far as the last 13 years? Now you're seeing more and more whiskey enthusiasts getting excited about New York whiskeys in general.
Right. I mean, I think in the beginning, people were quite dismissive of anything outside of Kentucky. I mean, I don't think we were alone in that, but New York is perhaps culturally furthest from Kentucky, and therefore perhaps the hardest to swallow in terms of a whiskey making. But obviously, New York is a very culinary city. It's a very the cocktail culture is really rich in New York. And so, a lot of the spirits industry happens in New York City, even if not necessarily all the distilling happens in New York City. And our idea was, let's bring the distilling to New York City and interact with the people who are making cocktails and interact with the people who are going to the liquor stores and interested in those high-end whiskeys. And simultaneously, I think people have realized that even though there's a lot of different bottles out there from Kentucky distillers, in a lot of cases, they're sharing barrels behind the scenes. There's not a lot of transparency. There's not a lot of differentiation, one brand to another in some instances. Right. So, it's very easy to sort of travel through Kentucky bourbon and come out on the other side and be interested in what else is out there. And so we've started to see rye, which makes a lot of sense for New England and the mid-Atlantic states. Yeah. But Texas has its own sort of characteristic of whiskeys where you have a lot of hot days and cold nights and really sort of oak forward whiskeys from Texas. You got malt whiskeys from the Pacific Northwest, Westland and Westward and Copperworks. So we're entering an era of increased regionality in American whiskey, and the world is definitely watching. I mean, you look at sort of what people are aware of internationally. They know a lot more about American whiskey sometimes than American consumers, because it's so. I think there's a lot of creativity and there's a lot of energy and passion and sort of just there's a lot of enthusiasm around what craft distillers are doing, and so that is making its way around the country, around the world, and at a certain point, it's impossible to ignore, which is great.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. Love what you're doing there and what's happening in the world of all whiskeys and New York whiskeys. You even landed as a baseball player on the front of a bottle recently, and this is UK only. Is that right?
I believe it is sold. Well, it's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, we have to ask. Yeah. So this is a barrel of Kings County peated bourbon. Yeah. And there was a project where Adam Brands, which is behind Boutique Whiskey Company, they were sort of soliciting a few barrels from a few different American producers. And we love our peated bourbon, but it's in a way, there's possibly more of an international audience for the peated bourbon than domestically, because obviously so much Scotch whiskey is peated and people understand that clearly enough. So our idea was, let's put this in sort of the market as a way to connect to that sort of older tradition of pot stilled and peated whiskey. So yeah, I think you can get it on Masters and Malts. You can get it through some of the usual channels in England and Europe. But that's a cool project. Distillery 291 was involved. A lot of great American craft distillers in that little series.
Very cool indeed. Everything you're doing there, we can't wait to try the Bottled-in-Bond 7-year-old. I know everyone who's a coffee fan and who's a Kings County fan will enjoy the coffee whiskey. So be watching for that wherever you get Kings County whiskey. And Colin, always a pleasure seeing you. You have so many great bottles there behind you. Are some of those just little both ones we've seen and the little experiments that you've done?
Well, I could point you to this. This is one of the first whiskeys I ever made.
That's one of the first right there.
Yeah, this is before we sort of refined everything.
And you've kept it just in bottle just to remind yourself all those years.
Yeah, it's a little bit of. I wasn't always aiming to be a craft distiller. There was a time when craft distilling didn't exist really,
right?
15 years ago. So what were you looking to? I had a slightly more of a moonshiner's approach,
right,
which is you don't tell people what you're doing and you sell everything under the table. And but I got really hooked on distilling. I thought that distilling was kind of a fun, let's call it a hobby at that point. But that's what got me interested in looking into becoming a professional distiller. And so then went that direction. I think this is the first 4-year bourbon that we ever did, which was an exciting landmark to cross the 4-year threshold.
That was the first.
Yeah, so that's out of a 5-gallon barrel. Now most of the barrels that we use are 53s. We do some 30s, but and in some of the whiskeys we have 15-gallon barrels that are still left, but we haven't filled a 15 in 4 years. So we've changed a lot over the years, but in a way, I don't think our whiskeys have. I think they always have reflected that sort of creative, transparent, adventurous sort of spirit that is a part of New York City culture, is a part of New York City's restaurant culture and nightlife culture, and really has been a way in a way kind of different from the commercial American bourbon scene, which is much more industrialized and much more commoditized. And so to be able to kind of step away from that and be more boutique-y in a way, in a sort of landscape where when we got started, there weren't so many boutique distilleries. But of course, now you have great ones in Kentucky and Tennessee and New York. So there's a cool reorientation of the landscape of what people care about and what people are interested in. And it's exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah, it is. It's exciting to see what you've done, how you've grown it, and should probably ask any new books coming up. I know you have so many that are out there. Are there any?
There's a new book on the way, and it is a travelogue through American whiskey, but it is probably too early to say much more than that. But stay tuned, and probably in the spring of next year, we'll have more to talk about.
Cool. Look forward to it, and of course, so many great books Colin already has. Be watching. That are already out there. How many total do you have out there right now? I know there's.
This is the Guide to Urban Moonshine.
Yeah.
And then I also have, for those who are really interested in American whiskey, Dead Distillers.
Yeah, Dead Distillers.
This is a cool book that never quite gets the love it should.
That's right.
But the new book will be more about contemporary landscape of mostly just distillers. I like distillers. In addition to, I guess, going back to that conversation about being really excited to make moonshine, I came to really appreciate distilleries, and that's whether you're talking about Wild Turkey or you're talking about Jack Daniel or you're talking about Distillery 291 or Westward. There's so many different approaches to making whiskey, and I kind of love it all. And so anyway, hopefully that will be a part of the new book.
Can't wait. About a year from now, you'll be seeing that, really looking at some of the new distilleries, the distillers taking us through not just New York, but all throughout the whole country, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Well done, Colin. Thanks for joining us on Bourbon Blog, and good luck with all the upcoming releases. And Again, the coffee whiskey, a whole new way to have a whiskey and coffee in one, and it's already ready to go.
Yeah, you can buy it now on our website. So if you're remotely curious, spend the $45.
It's so good. I mean, this is really tasty. I love it. It has a lot.
Yeah,
probably some of the most complexity that I've ever had on something that is a spirit that's coffee forward. I love this.
Yeah.
A lot of great complexity. Thanks, Colin. Cheers.